Hi, everyone. I am Camille Miller, the founder of the Natural Life Business Partnership, and we are here today with Dr. George Wang of Wisdom Health and Wellbeing out of Short Hills, New Jersey. We're talking today about a natural approach to preventing and treating Alzheimer's. Thank you, Dr. Wang, for joining us today.
Thanks, Camille, for having me.
I appreciate it. First, I think the best way to start the conversation, and probably the biggest question you get, is there a difference between Alzheimer's and dementia? Are they treated the same way?
Yeah, so that's a very common question and a source of confusion for many people.
Mm-hmm.
So think of dementia as actually a symptom. Think of it as a final destination, but there are many paths that could lead to that final destination. And Alzheimer's disease is just one of those paths. So Alzheimer's is one of the many different causes of dementia, but it's by far the most common cause of dementia, estimated to account for 60 to 80% of cases of dementia. And Alzheimer's, doesn't, in the beginning, obviously, it doesn't, a person could develop Alzheimer's 10, 20 years before the development of dementia. And then eventually over that period of time, enough changes in the brain happen so that they start to have memory symptoms, and then they eventually develop the full-blown symptoms of dementia.
Understood. So is it possible to have Alzheimer's without the dementia, or just the early stages, and that's definitely how it always ends up?
Right. So at least in conventional medicine, in the way medicine has been practiced up to this point, Alzheimer's is known in the scientific community to be a progressive neurodegenerative disease, which means that once a person develops it, there usually is no way of stopping the progression or reversing it. So so eventually a person who develops Alzheimer's disease will inevitably develop dementia, and eventually in the end die from Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, understood. So I'm just trying to lay some foundations here for the people that may be listening to this, either through our podcast or through the video cast. For Alzheimer's, I guess my first question, or anyone's question, I'm trying to think what other people's questions would be. Is it a genetic disease, or can someone form it based on not preventing it? We'll talk about preventative ways, but is it genetic? Is it predisposed?
Yes. So there are essentially two forms of what we call genetic predisposition to Alzheimer's disease. The most common form of Alzheimer's disease is called the sporadic form, and that accounts for the majority of cases of Alzheimer's disease. The mean age of onset is about 80 years. Family history does increase a person's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease in the sporadic form, but the genetically inherited form, that's what we call autosomal dominantly inherited Alzheimer's disease, that accounts for less than 1% of all cases of Alzheimer's disease, and that's manifests with a different picture. The age of onset is usually very early, between ages 35 and 50, mm-hmm. and a person with that genetic inheritance, a person who inherits that genetic mutation have a nearly 100% risk of early onset Alzheimer's disease.
Understood.
So for the majority of cases, that is not how a person develops Alzheimer's disease.
All right, so let's start with how do people develop Alzheimer's disease in those other cases?
Sure. So let's actually go back to this. So the majority of people who develop Alzheimer's disease, which is the sporadic form, the genetic risk is such that so there's a genetic mutation called the ApoE, and that's there are three common variations of that gene, what's called the epsilon 2, epsilon 3, and epsilon 4, or colloquially, you may hear people say ApoE4. So as someone who has the ApoE4 gene has an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease. If you have one copy of that ApoE4 gene, you have a 3 times increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. Doesn't necessarily mean that you have to develop it, just a higher risk. And if you have 2 copies of that gene, you have 12 times the risk of compared to someone who does not have that gene. The most common form of ApoE is ApoE3, which is the variation that does not increase the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. So that's the genetic risk. But keep in mind that despite the fact that even if you have that gene and it increases your risk for having Alzheimer's disease, you don't necessarily have to develop Alzheimer's disease. So obviously there are other risk factors. So those are the genetic risk factors, what we call non-modifiable risk factors, meaning you cannot change your DNA, but you can certainly change the expression of your DNA, or what we call epigenetic. Essentially, that includes lifestyle choices, dietary choices, and your environmental factors. So everything you do other in your daily activity and throughout your whole lifespan, other than your genetics, those will influence how you express the kinds of genes you have. So one other non-modifiable risk factor for development of Alzheimer's is age, and in fact, it's the greatest risk factor for dementia overall. And as at least for now, age is not modifiable. 80% of dementias happen in people who are age 75 years or older. But if you consider age on its own, by excluding all the confounding factors or comorbidities that occur with aging, such as atherosclerotic heart disease, if you take those factors away and look at age alone, and that type of research study is very hard to do, looking just at age alone. But probably, if you get rid of all the other influences, age on its own probably would be a less powerful risk factor. And we do see that people nowadays, people are living to a very old age, 90s, 100 centenarians, and they can have a very sharp mind. So cognitive impairment or memory problems is not a necessary part of aging. So those are the non-modifiable risk factors. And then there are factors, what we call modifiable risk factors that we can change. In fact, just a little bit over a year ago, the Lancet Commission published in the Lancet, which is a very well-respected medical journal, a study that looks at the potential modifiable risk factors for the development of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease. And some of these factors that we can change include, for example, smoking, high blood pressure, depression, diabetes, and physical activity, which is not surprising, and even things like social isolation, because there's something called sociogenomics, which essentially looks at the fact that our social connectivity, our social networks, how well we're connected with other people actually influences the way we express our genes. That's going back to what I mentioned before, the epigenetic. So people who are isolated, socially isolated, tend to have more inflammation, and that in turn can increase the risk for many issues, problems, including cognitive decline. So that's a long answer to your question.
Yeah, but a very good one. So, so the next question is, when can anyone, it sounds like it's very connected to lifestyle, what we eat, what we do, who we're with, which makes a lot of sense through that gene expression. So if we're looking at aging, what do we do now, or at what point can we start prevention? I guess we could start at any point, but at what point do you start saying, okay, let's start preventing this now? So when that point is, and then also talking about these natural approaches that we can just do every single day or add to our lifestyle that would help.
Right. So in terms of timing, certainly it's always to start living a healthy lifestyle, following healthy dietary choices as early as possible. But if we're looking at the development of dementia, and we said a little earlier that once you develop the symptoms of memory problems, we know that the changes in the brain, the pathological changes in the brain already started 10, 20 years before that.
Oh.
So at least midlife will be a good time to start. Don't wait until later, because by that time, many changes in the brain probably would have already started. The pathological changes, harmful changes in the brain. So certainly in the 40s, if possible, and even younger if possible. And essentially the lifestyle changes that affect many risk factors, not just dementia, but and dementia just shares many risk factors with many chronic diseases, such as atherosclerotic disease, such as coronary artery disease, or strokes, peripheral vascular disease, diabetes. And so if you address those factors by living a healthy lifestyle, meaning being physically active, socially engaged, eating well, which means not following the standard American diet, but rather a Mediterranean type, or Mediterranean-like, and even better than that, a whole food, primarily plant-based diet. That those healthy choices, will not only influence the risk of developing Alzheimer's disease and dementia in general, but also other chronic diseases in general.
Agreed. So whenever someone talks about a plant-based diet, those whole approaches, there's two questions I ask. The first being, how do you feel about organic? Like, I eat organic because I don't want the pesticides and the herbicides and everything in my body. Is that something that you tell people to stay away from as well? Doesn't matter, or do you feel it doesn't matter as long as they're eating any types of plants?
Yes. So as a integrative medicine and functional medicine physician, I recommend all my patients, if possible, to choose organically grown food rather than conventionally grown food, for the reasons that you mentioned. There are potentially many chemicals that are harmful, carcinogenic, toxic, and choosing an organic lifestyle matters, and improves the immune system. And that's a good way for us to look at, that's a good segue for us to look at the three subcategories of Alzheimer's disease.
Okay.
So And this is according to the classification of Dr. Dale Bredesen. So for anyone who hasn't read the book, which was published by Dr. Dale Bredesen at the end of 2017, it's called End of Alzheimer's. I highly recommend reading that. Dr. Bredesen is a neurologist, used to be a UCLA professor, and has been doing Alzheimer's research for decades. And he has developed a innovative functional medicine-based holistic approach to treating and preventing Alzheimer's disease. And according to Dr. Bredesen's classification of Alzheimer's disease, you could think of causes as falling under three potential categories. One is inflammatory. One is atrophic, meaning it's related to insufficient nutrients, hormones, and then the third category, toxic type. Toxins such as heavy metals or mycotoxins, meaning mold toxins, those fall under category type 3. Type 1 inflammatory often comes from the standard American diet, also being sedentary, smoking. Those all contribute to type 1, the inflammatory type. And then type 2, the nutrient deficient, can be influenced by hormone deficiency, and again, lack of a healthy diet can influence the type 2. Sedentary activity, sedentary lifestyle can also contribute to that, because by being physically active, that actually increases the level of a chemical, naturally produced chemical in our body called BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which promotes the healthy connections, the synaptic connections in the brain, and nourishes the brain cells. So that's just a quick overall overview of the potential types of Alzheimer's disease, or contributing factors to Alzheimer's disease. And it's recommended, at least Dr. Bredesen recommends, that just as anyone after the age of 50, it's recommended that they undergo colonoscopy as a screening tool to screen for colorectal cancer. There's something that we could undergo what's called cognoscopy. So cognoscopy, COGNOSCOPY. Essentially, you are just in the same way that you're screening for a problem before it starts. We are using this scope to evaluate for potential risk factors, and looking for those risk factors falling under those three categories: the inflammatory, the atrophic, and the toxic. And generally, these are in the form of laboratory testing, as well as obviously a complete history and physical, and the practitioner, the functional medicine, integrative medicine practitioner who is capable of doing this type of evaluation will ask the person about potential risk factors, lifestyle risk factors, environmental risk factors that could lead to these, that could increase one's risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. So once we identify those risks through the cognoscopy, then we can certainly then address them.
Understood. Also explaining why the organic plant-based makes a lot of sense for the toxicity, for the inflammation, for the rest. My second question around at least the plant-based part, is it always vegetarian only the best way? Is that what you prescribe? Or is it just lessening the amount of meats that we're eating? And is that connected?
Yes, very, very good question. So when we have a lot of clinical research studies that have shown, and this is not just in the dementia literature, just essentially the broader literature showing that a plant-based diet, as much of a plant-based diet that one can follow, that significantly decreases risk for developing chronic diseases in the future. So I generally recommend, first of all, whole food, meaning avoiding processed foods, because generally processed foods come with a lot of sugar, a lot of unhealthy fats, which are the major risk factors for contributing to chronic diseases such as diabetes, vascular disease, including dementia, and then mostly plants if possible. Ideally, as little animals and none if possible. That would be the most healthy type of diet.
So
certainly when someone wishes to change to that type of dietary choice, it's often people can end up being nutrition deficient if they are not choosing a diverse diet. So I always recommend doing it under the guidance of a nutritionist or health coach or a practitioner, a physician who is well versed in dietary counseling.
Understood. Just going back to the meat, there's a lot of people that we hear that try the high protein diets. A lot of high protein diets we hear about. Can that have more of the crippling effect on the body? And is it really because of the way that the animals are raised and there's not a lot of fiber in it, a lot of nutrients? Why is the meat the bad part?
Right. So not all proteins are the same. So if you're talking about, so it's really not a matter of high protein. It's a matter of where you're getting the protein from. Okay. When you're getting protein from animals, you're not only are you getting the protein, but you're also getting other harmful chemicals or harmful substances along with it, such as unhealthy fats, cholesterol, which the increase your cholesterol also influences what we call the microbiome. And so the microbiome essentially is referring to the healthy bacteria that's living in your gut. And the scientific and medical community is just starting to learn more, and the research is happening at an exponential rate in terms of how important the microbiome is, the population of healthy bacteria in your gut is in terms of influencing our overall health. We know that the immune system, the microbiome influences our immune system, influences hormones, even influences neurotransmitters. There's something called the mind-gut connection. It also influences, it contributes to, poor microbiome contributes to many inflammatory diseases, as well as autoimmune diseases. So getting back to where you're getting the protein from, if you're getting the protein from animals, that is generally associated with a worse microbiome. And if you're getting the protein from plants, not only are you getting the protein, you're also getting all these micronutrients, vitamins, minerals. You're getting phytonutrients, which are nutrients by definition, which you can get only from plants. You cannot get these from animals, as well as all of the fibers. The plants contain fibers, some of which your own body, your own digestive system cannot digest, but the healthy bacteria in your gut will digest them, and that in turn becomes the nutrient for the healthy bacteria. and so we call that prebiotic. So, which then leads to a healthy microbiome. So many benefits of getting protein from plants.
Which is why they commonly call the microbiome or our gut our second brain.
Yes.
That's the connection there.
Exactly.
And what's your opinion on grains? Or some people that keep grains out, keep grains in, the way they're cooked, the way they're soaked. How's your feeling on grains and the way it interferes with our minds or brains?
So there, in terms of grains, I think the common area of controversy or interest is wheat or gluten-containing grains, and if so, whole grains is a very important group of foods to have. Whole grains provide countless carbohydrates. They provide a lot of fibers. So first of all, if you were to eat grains, definitely eat whole grains rather than refined grains. So by refined grains, we mean things like white rice versus brown rice. So brown rice is whole grain, white rice is refined grain, and other refined products such as bread, white pasta, which because of the fact that they are relatively higher glycemic index, which means when you eat them, your blood sugar shoots up more quickly. Over the long term, they are not good for cardiovascular health. They increase risk for insulin resistance and diabetes. Whereas if you eat whole grains, you're eating all of the fibers that come with the grain, and that is beneficial to your microbiome, the contributing to a healthy gut, and also won't lead to a spike in your blood sugar. The issue with wheat and gluten is that some people are sensitive to gluten in wheat, all the components in wheat other than the gluten. So for those individuals who are sensitive, and this can be done through testing, laboratory testing, if a person is sensitive to gluten or wheat, or have other gut issues such as leaky gut, then yes, in those situations, the person should stay away from wheat or gluten in order to heal the gut.
But those that aren't testing sensitive, you feel it's okay to have that? It's not inflammatory?
So for a person, right? Short answer is yes, for a person who is healthy. A person who is healthy, we know for sure that the person doesn't have leaky gut or any other gut issues, or any sensitivities to any components in the grain. Whatever the grain is under consideration, then yes.
Excellent.
I generally recommend not avoiding a whole food group from your diet. For a short term, if to heal, it might be it's okay for healing. But let's say if a person were to completely eliminate grains, whole grains from their diet for the rest of their lifetime, that is taking away a major source of nutrients, and it's eventually leads to it's not sustainable in the long term. But having said that, there are situations in which a person may need to stay away from grains in order to heal. So that's why it's very important before a person chooses to adopt a certain dietary choice for a long time, it's always a good idea to consult with a healthcare practitioner who knows, who's fluent, versatile in counseling patients on dietary choices.
Excellent. One other category that I'm going to ask about is fish and seafood. So some say it has high mercury levels, which is very damaging, but I could see it has like the omega-3 oils that we could use that would be helpful. How do you feel on that?
Right. So mercury falls under the type 3 category of
Toxin.
it's a
Mhm.
risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease. And certainly dietary mercury from fish and seafood is something to really pay attention to.
Okay.
The other sources of mercury, non-dietary sources of mercury, but in terms of the diet, so one needs to be careful in terms of how much fish and seafood they're consuming. I've seen patients who might tell me that oh, I don't really eat that much fish and seafood, but when we go ahead and test their blood mercury level, some of them turn out to have pretty high mercury levels.
Wow.
So you'll be surprised, and there are cases of dementia, of people showing up with dementia, and the mercury was the primary driver in terms of the development of that person's dementia. And once the fish was stopped, once the mercury level was corrected, the dementia reversed.
Wow.
So certainly something to pay attention to. Omega-3s, there are certainly supplements for omega-3. So the fish really doesn't produce omega-3. It's the sea plants that produce omega-3. So you could, for a more direct way of consuming omega-3, you could get them from supplements derived from the sea plants. But just taking just a little bit of a step back, the whole fixation to omega-3 and 6 comes from the fact that it's really the ratio of omega-6 to 3 that's more important.
Right.
And the reason why we became so fixated on omega-6 to 3 ratio is really because the standard American diet leads to a very high omega-6 to 3 ratio of 20 or more. Whereas if a person chooses to eat a generally whole food type of diet, mostly plants, the omega-6 to 3 ratio as it occurs in nature from whole foods in nature gives us is essentially almost 1-to-1. So in that case, unless a person is trying to heal from inflammatory disease or other types of disease or inflammation or autoimmune disease, then for a healthy person who is not trying to heal from a disease, eating mostly whole foods, mostly plants, will lead to a healthy omega-6 to 3 ratio. So we really don't need to worry about that by having to overconsume fish or seafood. Overconsume fish, essentially.
Excellent. So it sounds, at least from this interview, unless I just brought you in that direction, that the best approach to preventing the Alzheimer's, the later onset dementia, is really through what we put in our bodies. The 3 things that we were talking about, just watching, our lifestyle, watching our toxins, eating healthy, very plant-based, is the best prevention. Anything else?
Yes, those are the important pillars of the prevention: physical activity, social engagement. Don't smoke, or if you're smoking, try to get help with quitting.
What about alcohol?
Right. So alcohol, ideally none.
Okay.
Only someone who already has cognitive impairment or someone who has Alzheimer's disease completely stay away from alcohol.
Okay.
And also there is a concept called cognitive reserve, which essentially comes from living a life that promotes very meaningful use of brain activity. Which also includes stress management, leisure activities, activities that promote the brain, reading, doing purposeful work, finding meaning in life. So all those all contribute to a healthy cognitive reserve.
So like, reading, doing crossword puzzles, using your brain, not just watching the TV, but actually using it to think through problems and work through things constantly. And I think interaction probably does that as well. Just having intelligent conversation and keeping up on the news.
Yes.
Excellent.
And also one other thing would be mindfulness practice. So we do know from clinical research that mindfulness practice does improve cognition. People who, and mindfulness practice can come in many different forms. There are movement-based mindfulness practice such as Tai Chi, yoga. There's also meditation, prayers. Focused prayers is also considered mindfulness practice. And we know that people who do mindfulness practice daily in clinical research have a thicker prefrontal cortex, is part of the brain in the front part of the brain, and in as little as 8 weeks can influence the density of the hypothalamus, which is the part of the brain affected in dementia. In as little as 8 weeks, you can see the difference on brain imaging.
Wow.
So mindfulness practice is another, is another lifestyle choice to incorporate.
Excellent. And is that, I'm sorry. I was going to say, is that more because it reduces stress or it just kind of quiets the mind?
Yeah, it reduces stress. It reduces inflammation. It changes genetic expression. So it changes what we mentioned before. You can have the gene, but mindfulness practice changes the way the genes are expressed. So, and not only has this been shown to be helpful in cognition in older adults, also in cognitive impaired adults, mindfulness practice also potentially could change gene expression. Mindfulness practice combined with healthy lifestyle choice, healthy dietary choice, can even influence gene expression in people with cancer.
Wow.
For example, the work with Dr. Dean Wanish, he's done this type of study in men with early prostate cancer, and these lifestyle choices changes the way the genes are expressed in their prostate tissue.
Excellent. That is some good information there. What is the most common mistruths about aging? I mean, something that we haven't already said, because you've come up with so much in lifestyle and food already. But is there anything that we didn't touch on that's a common mistruth that we should just talk about?
Right. So we already talked about the fact that the most common misconception is that aging is associated with memory decline, which is not true. With healthy aging, memory should not decline. The cognitive function should be intact. Also, we know from studies looking at people living the blue zones areas. These are people living a very healthy lifestyle, very healthy dietary choices. With aging in the developed countries, such as in the U.S., we generally see an increase in the blood pressure, but we used to think, the medical community, we used to think that blood pressure is going to increase with aging. But if we look at people in the blue zone area, their blood pressure actually drops with aging. So that's a very good lesson there. When we follow healthy lifestyle choices with healthy aging, we should not expect worsening increase in the blood pressure.
Interesting.
And in general, healthy aging is the key in geriatrics. So I am also a geriatrician in training. So my purpose is to help people age successfully. And all of the lifestyle choices we just talked about in this discussion all play an important role in healthy aging and also healthy cognitive aging.
Excellent. Anything that we missed before we wrap it up today?
So again, just want to emphasize the holistic approach to preventing and treating Alzheimer's disease or cognitive decline should look at the whole person, body, mind, lifestyle choices, and doing a cognoscopy is a good idea. And for people who already have Alzheimer's, highly recommend family members reading the book by Dr. Bredesen, End of Alzheimer's. And there are many successful cases already of Alzheimer's reversal through this approach. It's called the Bredesen Recode program. So highly recommend looking into learning a little bit more about that program.
Excellent. And Dr. Wang, for people that are watching this later on in replay or hearing it on their podcast, what's the best way to get in contact with you?
So I have a integrative and functional medicine practice in Short Hills. I have a website. The practice website URL is www.wisdomheal, WISDONHEAL.com. And on the website, there are options to contact us. They could also call my office, 973-671-1868.
Excellent. I just want to mention that is Short Hills in New Jersey, because this is a national broadcast. So,
Right.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this later, either on podcast or through our YouTube channel, the information will be in our show notes, as will all of the transcripts to this interview. And Dr. Wang, I do thank you for being a part of our NLBP member spotlight today and for taking the time to join us and answer some questions.
It was a pleasure for me to be here, Camille.
Thank you.